The thunder of aircraft engines split the darkness above Portsmouth on the night of September 15th, 1940. Sergeant Lysander Kestrel pressed his eye against the optical sight of the 3.7-inch anti-aircraft gun, his weathered hands gripping the traverse wheel as enemy bombers approached in formation. The official targeting procedure called for standard lead calculations and predetermined firing patterns, but Kestrel had spent weeks studying something the manual never mentioned: the way moonlight reflected off aircraft wings at specific angles. Tonight, with a three-quarter moon casting silver shadows across the English Channel, he made a decision that would violate every regulation in the Royal Canadian Artillery Handbook. Instead of following the prescribed firing solution, he adjusted his elevation to track the glint of moonlight dancing across the enemy wings, using the lunar illumination as his targeting reference. His gun crew watched in stunned silence as their sergeant abandoned standard protocol and aimed for the shimmer rather than the calculated intercept point. The first round screamed into the night sky, followed by a distant explosion that lit up the horizon, then another and another. No one in the 3rd Canadian Anti-Aircraft Regiment knew that one man's defiance of orders that evening would revolutionize aerial gunnery tactics and become the most studied innovation in Commonwealth artillery doctrine. Lysander Kestrel grew up in the remote wilderness of northern Manitoba, where his father operated a small trading post near the shores of Lake Winnipeg. Born in 1918, he spent his childhood learning to track game through dense forest, developing an almost supernatural ability to spot movement against complex backgrounds. His father, a veteran of the Great War who had served with the Canadian Expeditionary Force, taught him that sometimes the best hunters succeeded by ignoring conventional wisdom and trusting their instincts instead. During long winter months, when temperatures dropped to 40 below zero, Kestrel would practice shooting at targets illuminated only by moonlight, learning to use shadows and reflected light to improve his accuracy. His mother, a schoolteacher from Ontario, instilled in him a methodical approach to problem-solving and an unwavering sense of duty to protect those who could not protect themselves. When war erupted across Europe in 1939, Kestrel felt compelled to enlist, driven by both patriotic fervor and a deep-seated belief that his unique skills could make a difference in the fight against fascism. He arrived at the recruitment office in Winnipeg on a cold February morning in 1940, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with penetrating grey eyes and calloused hands that spoke of years spent handling firearms in challenging conditions. The recruiting sergeant initially tried to steer him toward infantry service, but Kestrel insisted on artillery, claiming he had ideas about improving anti-aircraft gunnery that the military needed to hear. His training at Camp Borden revealed an exceptional aptitude for ballistics calculations and an uncanny ability to predict aircraft movement patterns, though his instructors grew frustrated with his tendency to question established procedures. He had no idea that soon those instincts would be all that stood between hundreds of civilians and annihilation from above. The summer of 1940 marked the beginning of what would become known as the Battle of Britain, as the German Luftwaffe launched massive bombing campaigns against British cities, ports, and strategic targets. Prime Minister Winston Churchill had declared that the fate of Western civilization hung in the balance, as Nazi Germany sought to achieve air superiority before launching Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain. German bombers, primarily Heinkel He-111s and Dornier Do-217s, flew nightly missions across the English Channel, targeting critical infrastructure and terrorizing civilian populations in London, Portsmouth, Southampton, and other strategic locations. The Royal Air Force fought desperately to maintain control of British airspace, but Fighter Command's resources were stretched to the breaking point, with Hurricane and Spitfire squadrons suffering devastating losses against overwhelming enemy numbers. Anti-aircraft defenses became crucial to Britain's survival strategy, as ground-based guns provided the only protection for cities during hours when fighter aircraft could not effectively operate. The mathematics of aerial warfare heavily favored the attackers, who could choose their timing, altitude, and approach vectors, while defenders had to react to threats across hundreds of miles of coastline simultaneously. Canadian forces had been integrated into British defensive networks, with anti-aircraft regiments positioned at key ports and industrial centres throughout southern England. Standard gunnery doctrine relied on complex calculations involving aircraft speed, altitude, wind conditions, and predetermined lead angles requiring gunners to estimate target positions several seconds into the future. However, nighttime operations presented enormous challenges, as optical range finding became nearly impossible without adequate illumination, forcing gun crews to rely on sound detection and primitive radar guidance that often proved insufficient for accurate targeting. The enemy understood these limitations and scheduled most bombing missions during periods of limited visibility, when conventional anti-aircraft fire posed minimal threat to their operations. By early September of 1940, German bombing raids had intensified to unprecedented levels, with hundreds of aircraft crossing the Channel nightly to strike British targets. Kestrel's unit, the 3rd Canadian Anti-Aircraft Regiment, had been stationed near Portsmouth since July, defending the vital naval base and surrounding residential areas from constant aerial assault. Night after night, they watched enemy formations pass overhead while their guns fired countless rounds with minimal success, following targeting procedures that seemed increasingly inadequate against fast-moving aircraft operating in darkness. The standard doctrine required gunners to calculate firing solutions based on estimated aircraft positions, but these calculations assumed optimal visibility conditions that rarely existed during actual combat operations. Kestrel began to notice that certain atmospheric conditions created opportunities for improved targeting that the manual never addressed, particularly when moonlight interacted with aircraft surfaces to create reflective signatures visible to trained observers. He spent off-duty hours studying lunar cycles and weather patterns, developing theories about how reflected light could be used to track aircraft movement more effectively than sound-based detection methods. His fellow gunners initially dismissed these ideas as eccentric speculation, but Kestrel continued to refine his observations, noting that metal aircraft surfaces produced distinctive reflection patterns that could be exploited for targeting purposes. The gun crew included Corporal Magnus Thorne, a former factory worker from Toronto who served as the primary loader, Private Cassius Vale, a farm boy from Saskatchewan who operated the ammunition supply, and gunner Roderick Ashworth, a mechanic from British Columbia who maintained the weapon systems. These men had developed enormous respect for their sergeant's unconventional thinking, having witnessed his exceptional marksmanship during training exercises, but they remained skeptical about abandoning proven procedures in favor of experimental techniques. The pressure to improve their effectiveness mounted daily as civilian casualties increased and criticism of anti-aircraft performance reached senior command levels. And then the night of September 14th brought news that would change everything they thought they knew about aerial warfare. Intelligence reports indicated that the Luftwaffe was planning a massive raid against Portsmouth for September 15th, with an estimated 80 to 100 aircraft scheduled to attack the naval yards, fuel depots, and residential areas in coordinated waves beginning around 2200 hours. The 3rd Canadian Anti-Aircraft Regiment received orders to maintain standard defensive positions and follow established firing procedures, with strict instructions to conserve ammunition for confirmed target acquisitions only. Kestrel studied the weather forecast and lunar conditions for that evening, noting that a 3/4 moon would provide optimal illumination between 21:30 and midnight, creating ideal circumstances for his experimental targeting technique. He approached his commanding officer, Major Harrison Blackthorne, requesting permission to modify firing procedures based on his moonlight reflection theory, but the major rejected the proposal as unauthorized and potentially dangerous to coordinated defensive operations. The official position remained that proven gunnery doctrine provided the best chance of success against incoming raids, despite mounting evidence that current methods were failing to protect civilian populations effectively. As evening approached on September 15th, Kestrel faced an agonizing decision between following direct orders and implementing tactics he believed could save hundreds of lives. His crew gathered around the 3.7-inch gun emplacement as darkness fell, checking ammunition supplies and reviewing standard targeting procedures one final time. The radio crackled with reports of enemy aircraft assembling over German airfields, preparing for what intelligence sources described as the largest bombing raid yet attempted against British targets. Corporal Thorne loaded the first round into the breech, while Private Vale arranged ammunition containers for rapid access, their movements precise and practiced after months of repetitive training. Gunner Ashworth performed final mechanical checks on the traversing and elevating mechanisms, ensuring smooth operation during the anticipated engagement. The mathematical odds against successful intercepts under standard procedures remained daunting, with previous raids achieving less than 5% hit rates, despite concentrated anti-aircraft fire from multiple battery positions. He thought the plan was desperate, but that desperation itself might be the key to breakthrough success. At 21:45 hours, radar stations along the south coast began detecting large formations of enemy aircraft crossing the channel, flying at approximately 12,000 feet altitude and maintaining steady course toward Portsmouth and surrounding targets. The air raid sirens wailed across the city as civilians sought shelter in underground stations, basements and purpose-built Anderson shelters scattered throughout residential neighborhoods. Kestrel peered through his optical sight and immediately noticed the distinct quality of reflected moonlight on the approaching aircraft wings, creating silvery signatures that stood out dramatically against the dark sky backdrop. The enemy formation consisted of Heinkel He, 111 bombers escorted by Messerschmitt Bf 110 fighters, flying in loose box formations designed to maximize bombing effectiveness while minimizing vulnerability to interceptor attacks. Standard gunnery procedure called for calculated lead firing based on estimated aircraft speed and heading, but Kestrel could see that the moonlight reflections provided far more precise targeting information than any mathematical formula could deliver. He made his decision in that crucial moment, abandoning prescribed firing solutions in favor of tracking the lunar illumination patterns dancing across enemy wings and fuselages. His crew watched in amazement as their sergeant completely ignored the official targeting reticle and instead followed the rhythmic shimmer of reflected light that revealed exact aircraft positions and movement vectors. The first enemy bomber approached their effective range at 22:07 hours, flying steady and level toward the naval yards approximately 2 miles northeast of their position. Kestrel adjusted his elevation to track the moonlight signature rather than the calculated intercept point, feeling the familiar weight of the traverse wheel beneath his hands as he had during countless hunting expeditions in the Manitoba wilderness. The targeting technique required him to anticipate how the reflection patterns would shift as aircraft changed position relative to the moon, creating a dynamic targeting solution that adjusted automatically for aircraft movement. Corporal Thorne stood ready with another round as Kestrel squeezed the trigger, sending the first shell arcing into the night sky with a deafening roar that shook the gun emplacement. The crew held their breath during the several seconds required for the projectile to reach target altitude, watching for the telltale flash that would indicate a successful hit. And then the night exploded in brilliant orange flame as the first Heinkel disintegrated under direct impact, its burning wreckage tumbling toward the harbor in a spectacular cascade of destruction that lit up the landscape for miles around. The success of that first shot sent shockwaves through the gun crew, who had never witnessed such precise targeting under nighttime conditions. Kestrel immediately traversed to engage the second bomber in formation, again using moonlight reflection as his primary targeting reference while completely ignoring standard gunnery doctrine. The Heinkel's pilot had apparently noticed the destruction of his wingman and began evasive maneuvers, banking left and right in an attempt to avoid the accurate fire that had just eliminated his companion. But the reflection signature remained clearly visible against the aircraft's aluminum skin, providing Kestrel with continuous targeting information despite the pilot's defensive actions. The second round found its mark with devastating precision, striking the bomber's port engine and sending it spiraling out of control toward the English countryside south of Portsmouth. Private Vale later described the moment as witnessing magic, as their sergeant seemed to possess supernatural ability to predict exactly where each aircraft would be when the shell arrived at target altitude. The third bomber in the formation had observed the destruction of its companions and attempted to climb rapidly while turning away from the effective anti-aircraft fire. But Kestrel simply adjusted his elevation to follow the moonlight dancing across its wings. The projectile struck the aircraft's bomb bay, triggering a massive secondary explosion that illuminated the entire sky and rained debris across several square miles of Hampshire farmland. Word of the extraordinary accuracy spread rapidly through the regimental communications network, with other battery positions requesting information about the 3rd Canadian Regiment's sudden improvement in targeting effectiveness. Major Blackthorne monitored the engagement from the command post, initially assuming that luck, rather than skill, explained the unprecedented hit rate, but growing increasingly intrigued as Kestrel continued to achieve results that defied statistical probability. The 4th aircraft fell victim to the same moonlight targeting technique at 22:23 hours. Its crew never understanding how ground-based gunners had achieved such deadly precision under conditions that should have made accurate fire nearly impossible. By this point, the surviving German aircraft had begun taking evasive action and climbing to higher altitudes in desperate attempts to escape the devastating anti-aircraft fire that was systematically destroying their formation. The 5th and final victory came at 22:31 hours, when Kestrel engaged a Messerschmitt Bf 110 fighter that had descended to investigate the destruction of the bomber formation. The fighter pilot apparently believed he could identify and suppress the anti-aircraft position that had caused such catastrophic damage to the raid, but he fatally underestimated the effectiveness of moonlight-based targeting against his highly reflective aircraft surfaces. Kestrel tracked the fighter's approach with almost casual precision, leading the target perfectly as it dove toward their gun position with guns blazing. The shell struck the Messerschmitt's cockpit area, killing the pilot instantly and sending the fighter crashing into a field approximately 1 mile from the gun emplacement. The remaining German aircraft abandoned their attack mission and retreated across the channel, having witnessed the destruction of 5 aircraft in less than 50 minutes by what appeared to be a single anti-aircraft gun. The mathematics of this achievement bordered on the impossible, as standard anti-aircraft doctrine suggested that downing even 1 aircraft per night represented exceptional performance under optimal conditions. Corporal Thorne, Private Vale, and Gunner Ashworth stood in stunned silence as they realized they had just participated in the most successful anti-aircraft engagement in Canadian military history, achieved through tactics that violated every regulation in their training manuals. The immediate aftermath brought a mixture of celebration and concern, as word of their success reached senior command levels and raised questions about how such extraordinary results had been accomplished. Major Blackthorne arrived at the gun position within minutes of the final engagement, demanding a detailed explanation of the targeting methods that had produced such unprecedented accuracy. Kestrel faced the difficult task of explaining his moonlight reflection technique to superior officers, who were trained to believe in mathematical precision rather than intuitive innovation. The tactical implications of this success extended far beyond a single engagement, as military analysts began to realize that conventional anti-aircraft doctrine might require fundamental revision in light of these remarkable results. The investigation that followed revealed the scientific basis behind Kestrel's moonlight targeting technique, which exploited the reflective properties of aluminum aircraft construction and the predictable behavior of light reflection at specific angles. Military engineers discovered that aircraft skin surfaces acted like mirrors under certain lighting conditions, creating distinctive signatures that could be tracked more reliably than radar contacts or visual observations alone. The technique required exceptional skill and training to implement effectively, as gunners needed to understand the relationship between lunar position, aircraft altitude, and reflection angles to achieve consistent results. Kestrel's background as a wilderness hunter had provided him with the observational skills necessary to notice these patterns and the confidence to trust his instincts over established procedures when the situation demanded innovation. Within weeks of the Portsmouth engagement, artillery training programs throughout the British Commonwealth began incorporating moonlight targeting instruction, though few gunners achieved the level of proficiency that Kestrel had demonstrated that night. The German Luftwaffe responded by modifying aircraft camouflage schemes and operational procedures to minimize reflective signatures during nighttime missions, but the damage to their bombing campaign momentum had already been accomplished. The success of September 15th marked a turning point in British air defense capabilities, as anti-aircraft units gained confidence in their ability to inflict meaningful casualties on enemy formations. Kestrel received the Distinguished Service Order for his actions that night, though the citation carefully avoided mentioning his violation of standard firing procedures, instead praising his exceptional marksmanship and tactical innovation. His gun crew members were awarded military medals in recognition of their role in the successful engagement, establishing them as heroes within the 3rd Canadian Anti-Aircraft Regiment. The psychological impact on both sides proved as significant as the tactical results, with British defenders gaining new confidence in their defensive capabilities, while German aircrew began to understand that nighttime bombing missions were no longer the low-risk operations they had previously enjoyed. Post-war analysis revealed that Kestrel's innovation had far-reaching consequences beyond the immediate tactical success of September 15th. The Moonlight targeting technique became standard doctrine in Commonwealth artillery training, with dedicated instruction programs established at gunnery schools throughout Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. American anti-aircraft units stationed in Britain quickly adopted similar methods, contributing to the overall improvement in air defense effectiveness that helped end the Blitz campaign. Military historians later calculated that the techniques pioneered that night in Portsmouth ultimately contributed to saving thousands of civilian lives by improving the overall effectiveness of anti-aircraft defenses across the British Isles. Kestrel returned to Manitoba after the war, where he married local schoolteacher Cordelia Hastings and established a small business guiding hunting expeditions in the northern wilderness. He rarely spoke about his military service, preferring to focus on peaceful pursuits and family life rather than dwelling on the violence of wartime experiences. Letters preserved in military archives reveal that many of the aircrew members, saved by improved anti-aircraft defenses, later wrote to thank him for his innovation, though most never learned his identity due to military security classifications. The Canadian War Museum eventually acquired his service records and personal effects, including the optical sight from the 3.7-inch gun that had achieved such remarkable success on September 15, 1940. Tactical doctrine manuals published in the 1950s and 60s continued to reference the Portsmouth engagement as a classic example of innovative thinking under pressure, though they typically omitted details about the unauthorized nature of Kestrel's targeting methods. His commanding officer, Major Blackthorne, later admitted in private correspondence that he would have court-martialed Kestrel for disobeying orders if the results had been unsuccessful. But the extraordinary effectiveness of the technique made disciplinary action impossible to justify. The broader lesson of individual initiative, triumphing over rigid institutional thinking, became a cornerstone of Canadian military training philosophy, influencing leadership development programs for decades after the war ended. Lysander Kestrel passed away peacefully in 1987, having lived to see his wartime innovations studied by military historians and artillery specialists around the world. His funeral in Winnipeg drew representatives from Veterans Affairs Canada, the Royal Canadian Artillery Association, and several international military organizations that recognized his contributions to air defense doctrine. The eulogy delivered by Brigadier General Marcus Stonehaven, himself a veteran of anti-aircraft operations, emphasized how one man's willingness to think beyond conventional limitations had transformed an entire branch of military science. Modern air defense systems continue to incorporate principles derived from Kestrel's original observations about reflection signatures and angular targeting, though advanced technology has largely replaced human observation with electronic sensors. The lesson of September 15th remains relevant in contemporary military thinking, where rapid technological change often requires soldiers to adapt established procedures to meet unexpected challenges on short notice. Educational programs at military academies frequently use the Portsmouth engagement as a case study in creative problem-solving under pressure, demonstrating how individual initiative can achieve results that exceed the capabilities of even the most sophisticated institutional planning. The balance between following orders and exercising independent judgment, continues to challenge military leaders, as modern warfare often demands split-second decisions that cannot wait for approval from higher command levels. Kestrel's decision to violate established gunnery doctrine illustrates the eternal tension between institutional discipline and innovative thinking, showing how exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional responses that transcend normal operational boundaries. His legacy extends beyond military applications to inspire anyone facing situations where conventional solutions prove inadequate and creative alternatives offer the only path to success. The mathematical impossibility of downing 5 aircraft in one engagement using standard techniques proved that human innovation could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds when individual courage combined with technical expertise to create breakthrough solutions. The ultimate significance of September 15th, 1940 extends beyond military history to encompass broader questions about the relationship between authority and responsibility in critical situations. Kestrel faced a choice between following orders that he believed would result in civilian casualties and implementing unauthorized tactics that offered the possibility of saving lives at the risk of his own military career. His decision to prioritize effectiveness over compliance exemplifies the kind of moral courage required when institutional procedures conflict with immediate human needs and the stakes involve life and death consequences. Modern analysts studying the engagement note that Kestrel's success depended not only on his innovative targeting technique, but also on his crew's willingness to support his unconventional approach despite their training to follow established procedures without question. The collaborative nature of their achievement demonstrates how individual innovation often requires institutional flexibility and team cohesion to achieve maximum effectiveness under pressure. The Portsmouth engagement reminds us that breakthrough innovations frequently emerge from the intersection of traditional skills, creative thinking, and desperate circumstances where conventional solutions have proven inadequate. Would you have possessed the courage to abandon proven procedures in favor of untested innovation when hundreds of lives hung in the balance and military discipline demanded absolute obedience to established doctrine? Comment below and share this story, so others remember what true leadership means when the choice comes down to following orders or saving lives.